Welcome to Reddit Reader. Active U.S. military personnel of Reddit. What are your thoughts and feelings about possibly being deployed to quell the protests that are occurring across the nation? Just got back from 9-month deployment in the Middle East. It makes me really sad to see what happened in the time I left. The thought of possibly having to organize and gear up in my own country is really troubling. This is not the way I wanted to come home. As an active duty Air Force officer currently deployed, it is my moral and legal obligation to disobey an unlawful order. It is not our job nor our duty to quell peaceful protests. America is not an authoritarian state. If asked to ensure protests remain peaceful and respond to open acts of hostility, that may be a different story, but it depends on circumstance. These are questions that we, officers, military members in general, ponder constantly, both in private with our peers and in our thoughts. What would we do? How far would we go? It is a thought-provoking and frightening time we live in when there is a real possibility of active duty members being used inside the United States. That is not our intended purpose. An argument could be made that it would be during a civil war, but that of the Guard and Reserves. I trust my commanding officers to make the right decisions based on defending the Constitution and our country, while following the law of armed conflict and the Uniform Code of Military Justice. That trust does not, however, absolve me of my own responsibility should it fall to me. I got out of the Army in 2007, worked as a military contractor after that until 2015. I told my wife this morning that I'm so glad to not be in the military right now because I would end up in prison for disobeying orders if I were to be deployed to combat protests. I joined up in 2000 with the wildly naive idea that it was the military's job to protect the Constitution. After nearly a decade of working for and with the military, I'm afraid to admit that I'm not convinced military personnel and their leaders have been equipped to decide what constitutes a lawful order. I recognize that I've had no association with the military for 5 years now, and things change. This is simply my observation. I did 30 years in the British Army. Thankfully, I only had to do one tour in Ulster. Using the military as policemen is generally a piss-poor option. They aren't trained in the same way as police, nor do they carry the same kit. It reduces options in the chain of escalation. It will almost certainly result in more deaths. I only did about a day in counter-riot training. The officers had some extra training in how to manage the situations, but none of this prepares you for a real riot. Someone will have to write up ROE for this. Ours was essentially an umbrella job for the politicians, hence the continuing investigations into a veteran's 40 years on. Luckily, I'm currently mobilized out of America and also work in a medical unit, and I'm also in the reserves, so don't have to worry about it. But honestly, it would be real difficult to stand in my uniform in full gear across from my fellow citizens during all this. I'd much rather be standing on their side. If I got called up during this, I'd probably start drinking beforehand. I likely won't be called to do the quelling, but it's a situation. There are serious injustices being done by the police that need answered for. Peaceful protest is fine and completely within our rights. Hell, in my opinion, even clashing with the police is fine because at least the anger is directed at the people who sparked it. But burning and looting business that had nothing to do with anything is senseless and an injustice in itself. The local owners and workers are putting in the work trying to make a living like anyone else, and in the past, big corporations have simply refused to rebuild, taking those jobs away. It takes away from the very legitimate arguments being made. That needs to stop, and I don't mind doing my part if asked to do so. Quelling riots, not protests. I would have a huge problem with stopping protests, even the flag-burning ones, because everyone has a First Amendment right to speech and assembly. Riots, less of a problem. The oath is to support and defend the Constitution, and it says right in the preamble, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty. That absolutely does not mean the military should be going house to house shooting civilians. That is what our corrupt and unaccountable police forces are for. Helping to guard and secure private property and the lives of innocent people is an effort I have no problem with. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it, dislike if you disliked it, and subscribe so you do not miss our next upload.